Yeah.
Don't you find it to be one of the biggest acts of love when people send you something, a piece of writing?
Yes.
I do.
Really do.
I find it's like, it is a way of saying, I see you.
And it's like, it's kind of cool when that happens because you realize that love is like happening all the time in your subconscious about for the people you love. And so when you're reading a book and all of a sudden you're like, I sent this to you because it reminded me of you.
Yeah.
And there's a flip side of that, which is you're obsessed with somebody. So you're like constantly looking for them in the world. Because I've definitely done that when I had like a horrible ex-boyfriend that I like literally tortured me. And I'd be like, saw this thing, heard this song, like, and you're just desperate.
Yeah.
So when it's not that, I think it's a very loving, non-manipulative gesture.
Yes.
But when it's actually like you're, you realize that love is an abstract all the time.
Yeah.
And it kind of comes in through the ways in which you connect those you love to something right in front of you.
Absolutely.
That is about somebody else and another thing.
Yeah.
And
it has nothing to do with you. Just writing something and saying to them, I thought of you when I read this.
What's cool about writing books is that a lot of the times as you're writing, that writer has written it for someone they know.
Yeah.
And that kind of greater connective experience, I remember in Hard Talk, there's a poem that says, baby, you're the strongest flower that ever grew. Remember that when the weather changes. And the first time I ever wrote that was to someone I had just gotten off the phone with who was going through a horrible breakup, and they were just so depressed and couldn't get out of bed. And it was like day 4 I had talked to her, and I called her. I was like on vacation or something. I remember being like, God, I feel so bad for her. Like she's devastated. And I was painting at a little table, and I painted those words, and they ended up in my book. But they were for somebody who was like, how do you get off the floor when your heart's this broken?
Yes.
And to me, resilience, which is kind of interesting because it's how we opened with this, is this kind of constant remembering that we are so much more like a natural thing.
Yes.
So to me, when you're looking for resilience, like think about a river, think about a flower, think about a plant, go on a walk, plant your feet in something, because like these like hundreds and thousands year old trees that live and nourish each other and have these crazy roots and branches, or like, these incredible oak trees that line the streets of New Orleans that get knocked down by hurricanes and grow in some way, or somebody comes and breaks a limb off or whatever it is, or tries to pave concrete over it and the roots kind of break the concrete. I mean, none of these things are worried about if they make it or not.
Yeah.
They're like, I'm on this planet and this is what I do.
I'm here.
Things break down, things rebuild. That is our flow. That is our selfness.
Yes.
And whenever someone's struggling, I'm always like, okay, plant something in your yard.
Yep.
Get a pod and put something in it and watch something grow. Mm-hmm. Like watch something turn from like the kind of nothingness of a seed, and without worry, without fatigue, without wondering if it, makes it or doesn't. This seed is going to reach for light, reach for the sun, and turn into something else. And Audre Lorde said that too. She said, pain doesn't stay pain forever. Sadness doesn't stay sadness forever. It turns into something else. And that was like, that's in Sister Outsider too. It's like, when I read that, I was like, that's it. Like it doesn't cut off. Your heart doesn't, your heart, if it breaks, it doesn't just like, oh, and then one day you're over it. There is no getting over it. You do not get over hard stuff. You don't get over big losses. You literally allow for it to turn into something else.
Yes.
You allow for the loss, the grief to consistently change into other emotions, feelings, ways of thinking about the person, yourself, the life you live. You like the broken heart kind of comes together in a different shape and with different fragments and pieces and things. And that is actually getting through life. And I think that if you keep trying to feel that like, oh, you just don't feel something about it the next day. No, you're always going to feel something about it.
Well, nothing in this world, in this universe, simply goes away. I mean, we're looking at stars that have their light no longer exists anymore. We're for thousands of years, and we're still feeling that light and seeing that light now. Yeah. And that's so powerful to me, because when you think about the fabric of the universe, or your words, just throwing words out there and thinking that once they leave your mouth, they're out in the world and then they just disappear. That's just not the way that the world works. You know, there is a fabric. Yeah. And so our words, even our thoughts, stay here. Yeah. They stay with us, and they are floating around, and it's very important and powerful, our words and our thoughts, because they do sit with us, and they become those seeds, and they stay with us, and we grow into whatever that is that we grow into. It's also why I love the way that so many amazing authors, specifically Black authors, go into the world of like ghosts, and because there's such an acknowledgement that we are, whether you're Toni Morrison, or whether you're talking in sci-fi or whatever it is, where you're like, it's kind of Octavia Butler, like where you're like, there is this acknowledgement that this existence in and of itself, this kind of burning star that is like nurturing our life, and we have no idea what it's going to do, that fragility and that kind of magical experience of the way that, matter is moving and doing, and how surreal it is to even be here. I love the way that's acknowledged in ghost stories, especially in Black literature, because it's, something also about Blackness, especially Southern Blackness, is it's spooky. Yeah. Everyone's got, my whole family at least has like voodoo stories and ghost stories, and there was never, I never really remember until I kind of maybe moved to a New York or California, and I know you have so many Southern roots too. It's like, I never met people who didn't believe in ghosts until I kind of moved to those places, where they're just like looked at life in such a way of like, well, matter, it is or it isn't. I was like, no, everyone I know in New Orleans believes in ghosts and spirits and things, so much so that when I would read certain books, and there was a ghost, that never felt weird. Anything. Yeah.
It never felt weird.
Like
yeah. Like I was just like, oh yeah. I never like, or if something strange was happening, or you'll have your certain, friends who don't have any of that in their background. If something kind of spooky does happen, and they have this, like, I have friends who have like in their later 40s been like, oh, I think I'm believing in like the spiritual or ghosts and whatever for the first time. And I'm like, how did you just get there?
Yeah.
And I think that that's really interesting, because there's something so ancestral, and again, that's so deeply woven into Black community, that there's spirits and there's ghosts, and and how often do you hear the word ancestors? Because there's this idea that we stay surrounded by this energy, and there's this mysticism, and that, I think, for me at least, as a writer who tries to kind of exist in this space of like kind of spiritual offering, that was what made it the easiest transition into, because so many of my, if you're writing about feelings, you're writing about the invisible. Yep. And I think for me, the kind of bridge to that was that, I didn't have parents that brought me to church, but I, lived above a voodoo shop on Decatur. Right. And so there was never a version of our lives that were absent of the spiritual in any way. Yeah. And I think or the kind of ghostly, magical, it was of course there's a witch somewhere, or ghost somewhere, or you're believing in a higher spirit somewhere, or whatever it is. And I think that this idea that we constantly are confronted with in community with invisible energy. Yes. Was always like, oh yeah, so I can write about the invisible. I can write about feelings, and I can write about how the invisible is so powerful. Like how kind of, because even if you're thinking about how you're working with your feelings to kind of alchemize a situation to make it healing for you rather than tragic for you, that is also invisible work.
Yes, it is.
Which I think is was really kind of a profound understanding for me later, to be like, yeah, like I think believing in ghosts helped me to write about feelings.
Wow. Yeah. Yes.
So